and thanks for tuning in. Your family doctor can be part of your formula for academic success. Not only can they identify physical health issues which disrupt learning, like vision or hearing, they can also identify psychological or social issues that need to be addressed. Dr. Mario Majed knows that potential firsthand. He has had more than 25 years of experience seeing families and children at all stages of life. Currently, he is the medical director for student services at Emory University. Prior to that position, he operated his own family practice, served in emergency treatment, and was a clinical instructor for family and community medicine at the University of Maryland. In our conversation, he shares perspectives on student success from a physician's vantage point, zooming into his own journey and then zooming out to think about the more traditional ways that physicians like him impact others. He is a longtime family friend, and I'm pleased to open up our circle to you.
Yeah, hi, everyone. My name is Mario Majed. I am a physician, family physician, and preventive medicine physician by training. Just a little bit about my background. I grew up in Pennsylvania, small town, and from there finished high school, public high school. Small town was small enough, we only had one high school, so everybody went to that high school.
Yeah.
I left there and then I went off to school at undergrad at Morehouse College. Studied biology, started as a chemistry major, but switched to biology, and then went into more of the pre-med track there. Left Morehouse and went on to med school at University of Maryland in Baltimore. Did my med school there in Baltimore, and then from there went on to do my residency training at Georgetown for family medicine. That wasn't the end. After that, I went out and worked for a while. And then I went back and did a second residency at Johns Hopkins in preventive medicine. And so I did two separate residencies. And then I kind of went back out to working. And most recently, I am actually the medical director and director of clinical services for Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, for the 15,000 or so undergraduate and graduate students that attend Emory. And prior to that, I was at University of Maryland, back at University of Maryland at the grad school in the School of Medicine as their medical director for student health.
Wow, awesome. So the one thing that I remember that I feel like you left out, but is also relevant, is you are a family practitioner in between there too.
Yes, so yeah, in between schooling.
Right.
I did. I worked as a family medicine physician initially, I came out of residency and worked for about 3 or 4 years with Unity Healthcare, which they run several federally qualified health centers or community health centers in the DC area. So worked there particularly at their East of the River Health Center in East DC, yeah, Southeast. I guess it's actually Southeast technically,
right.
In DC. And then from there, worked for Kaiser Permanente for about 10, 12 years doing urgent care, and had my own practice for a while also.
Right.
In Silver Spring, of my own urgent care and / primary care for a couple of years there in Silver Spring before I went back to University of Maryland.
See, that's so cool, because what I think people should know as they hear you share your perspective is that you've seen medicine from many different perspectives, like as an individual practitioner, as an administrator, and you've seen patients at different stages in their lives. So you've seen people at the beginning, you've seen people in emergency rooms, right? You've seen people as college students. So you have all of these different vantage points into the health of human beings, and in particular of younger people.
I'm going to say two things here. One, for parents, it's one of the probably few times that the kids see their parents not as the authority. And so kids, although they don't articulate it, they learn that this doctor figure, my parents are listening to this person. And when this person told my parents what to do, and that doesn't usually happen.
Right. Yeah.
So that is an early message that tells these kids that, okay, this doctor is holding some type of kind of power in our community,
Right.
which is good in some ways, but also not good, because then sometimes they see the doctor as being so far off from
Mm,
what they can achieve. Well,
mm,
wow, this patient just told my parent that they needed to do this for me, and my parents are doing it.
yeah.
So it's just that interesting kind of dynamic that happens there.
Mm,
So what I think we need to do in the medical community is do a better job of trying to break down that that
yep.
barrier where the doctors are
Yep.
seen so far up high, and make
Mhm,
sure that those kids know that no, we are people too, and
yeah.
you can do this too if
Right.
it's something that you're interested in. And it's not for everyone, but if you are interested in, you can do this too. So it's just that breaking down those barriers so more folks can kind of go into those areas.
Okay, so you've actually taken it in a direction that's also fruitful, but wasn't what I was thinking initially. So
Sorry.
no, 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 this is great. This is great because you've talked about two things that I think are necessary to continue a conversation about health challenges or uh, health precursors to academic achievement. So one of them, though, is this idea of having building a relationship with a family doctor, because the things that I was thinking we would start off talking about, that is identifying specific issues. Well, in this context, we're living through a stage where there's been a breakdown of trust for some families between themselves and the medical community, vis-a-vis viruses.
Yeah,
And, there's this whole subculture of people who are making unfounded claims about what happens when their children are vaccinated, not just with COVID, but with other vaccinations.
yeah,
So we know that that's prevalent. So what you're speaking to is the necessity of establishing a baseline of trust and a baseline relationship with families before we can even talk about all the other stuff.
yeah.
So that's one thing I'm hearing, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Uh-huh. And the second thing speaks to something that my wife and I were conscious of also, is the idea of young people seeing African Americans or people of color in not only in professional roles, but in professional roles where there's some stature, and there's some authority associated with that role. Now, I don't want to make it into an elitist thing, but just the point of it is that the people who speak into our lives, have authority.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about doctors here. I mean, it could be anyone, it could be ministers, but just thinking about the people, our children seeing the people who speak into our lives uh, in diverse ways,
Yeah,
that can have an influence in that child thinking about who they could be. So I feel that that's the other theme that you're speaking to, and that's a good one. That's a good one to point to. So, so we're talking about both things. We're talking about what doctors can do for families, but then also how the children who see those doctors can envision themselves doing those same things in their professions as they get older.
absolutely, absolutely. And even if it's not specifically in medicine, some
Hmm.
folks don't like dealing with blood and body
Yeah,
fluids and things like that, which is
right.
totally fine. But they still see that this person that's in front of them is carrying at least um, some degree of respect in our society.
Right, right,
And that might be something they strive towards, to, hey, maybe not in this area, but in another area, like you said, maybe I want to be a minister, or maybe be a
mhm,
teacher or a
right,
professor or whatever.
right.
All those areas can be. So I think the point that you're touching on, which I'm really also touching on, is that exposure
Yes,
to folks that look like them
yes.
in these areas of authority,
Hmm.
give them some ideas about what they can become or what they might want to become.
Right.
Because in retrospect, I'm not sure if I would say um, that's more important, but it is just as important as
Hmm.
the book learning, as going back and studying your calculus, and going back and studying your geometry or whatever classes that you have in high school. I'm not
Right.
sure I remember them all, but it's just as important to see that, because you pick up context
Yes.
in those in
Hmm.
those times when you're just
Hmm.
hanging out with your dad, hanging out with your mom,
Right.
going to these places or meeting these people. It's
Yes.
yeah, and that just kind of if you don't have that, you're really missing a whole lot.
Right. So to stick with this, and we can come back around to the other part later. So, but to stick with this part, and thinking about early exposure, that's become a new theme for me, because of some other studying that I've been doing. This other class that I just recently took that focuses on exposure, early exposure. So I believe strongly in the power of that. But to wrap that into what we're talking about now, did you have that? Did you have that kind of early exposure that helped you decide that you were going to major in biology and stick with it and become a physician?
I Not a lot. I
Hmm.
wish, in retrospect, as I kind of think back and the times where I have had some exposure, I
Hmm.
didn't have a lot. I Again, grew up in a small town. Our small town was probably about, I don't know, 15,000 people total.
Wow. Okay.
Um, Not tiny, but also not big. Um,
Okay.
I didn't know. My dad was a chemist.
Oh.
And but other than my dad, most, I think I'm just thinking back, most everyone else that I knew,
Hmm.
pretty much middle class, kind of,
Yeah.
working class type people,
Hmm.
teachers and whatever
Right.
of list you want to kind of run down there. So I
Hmm.
didn't have a whole lot of that, but I did know, and my dad really did push education
Yes.
in the sciences.
Yes.
So one of the things my siblings and we always joke about is that we used to have to do math problems, and so he would buy math books, and so
Hmm.
part of our time over the summer was what we had to do all this math problems, and before we can go outside and play.
That's awesome. I mean, for some people listening, it might sound cruel, but I think that's awesome.
In retrospect, it was also, but it was pretty painful when you're
Right. Of course. Of course.
when you're sitting there. You have
Oh,
to sit
yes.
at the table and do your math problems, and then
Right.
of course he'd come home at night and he'd ask us, and he'd
Right.
want to see the results, and if it
Mm.
wasn't right, he would sit down with us and go over them again,
Oh,
and so for a kid wanting to just run around and play, and it's like, is this
yes.
something? I'm not supposed to be in school. I guess that was our at the time. It was
Yeah.
pretty tough, but it really did set a good foundation for all of us. Now, not all my brothers and sisters. I have there were five of us,
Oh,
and one sister is also a chemist
see.
now,
Yeah.
and then I'm the kind of the other one that's kind of in the science field.
Hmm.
Two of my sisters are school teachers,
Okay.
for elementary school teachers, and one of my
Yeah.
brother is actually in sales, kind of advertising.
Okay.
So we didn't all go into science,
Yeah.
but we all had to do the math problem. So
Right.
for some of us, it came easier. For some other folks, it was a little harder. But I
Right.
think it still taught them the benefit of not just not just the math itself. I think they
Yeah.
appreciate that, but of doing something that and trying something that you're even working at, something that you're not good at,
Yes. Yes.
which I think is a tough lesson for a lot of kids and a lot of parents too. Um,
Hmm.
None of us want to see our kids and people struggle, but I guess maybe I'm kind of getting off the top right here.
No,
But
no, no, no. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. No. Good.
an important point that I like to point out is that struggle is good.
Hmm.
I think too many of our parents nowadays don't allow our kids to work through some things.
Mm.
And I think with that, we end up with young adults and even older adults that don't have the skills to work through a problem.
Hmm. Hmm.
Is to figure out, to say, okay, this is the problem. How am I going to get to the solution without someone
Right.
else helping them?
Right.
And so I think we've, in a lot of ways, and I understand why, we want our kids to have things better than we had it, and
Hmm.
want to see their kids struggle with something or deal with a tough problem. And you want to be there, but I
Yeah.
think it created a generation or two
Mm.
of folks that don't quite have the skills to think through something
Hmm. Hmm.
and to come up with a solution.
Yeah.
It's not the perfect solution,
Right. Right.
and be able to live with the results of their solution.
Yeah.
It's a skill that I think we just have missed on a lot, and I
Yeah.
see it a lot even when like I said, when I
Hmm.
deal with students and at the college level right now.
Mm.
They Too many of them don't have that skill set.
So what would you, how would you define that skill set? I think I have an idea of what you mean, but let's probe that a little bit. What do you
Okay.
what do you mean when you say skills? You know,
So, yeah, a lot of schools have gotten to the point where they just have kids memorize things.
mm-hmm,
You know what? Memorize this set of facts,
mm-hmm,
spit it out on the test.
mm-hmm,
Um, but it's really, it's a deeper level, not just memorizing, but be able
right,
to take that actual information that you memorized
right,
and use it in a way that's going to, a functional way
mm-hmm,
to make it applicable to your current situation, that
mm-hmm,
you can then have a solution to whatever problem you're dealing with.
right, right, right.
And I've kind of had this conversation with another buddy of mine just about calculus. You know,
Yes.
he was arguing that calculus, is useless. Why do we have to take it in high school or in college or whenever you take it?
Right.
Because almost no one uses it unless you're an engineer or something in those kind of, fields.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the benefit of that is that it's just that process of figuring something out.
Okay.
This is the given.
Mm-hmm.
This is what you start with.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to come up with this solution.
Right. Right.
The show your steps part that no one likes to do
Right.
is just working how you work through that problem. The steps of, okay, this is the problem. Here's my first try at it or
Mm-hmm.
crack at it.
Mm-hmm.
And you may not get the answer on that first try.
Right.
You go back to the beginning and do it all over again. And it's
Mm-hmm.
that iterative process that gets you to the solution a lot faster than in life in general. Because
Right.
in life, we don't have those answers.
Mm-hmm.
We have a problem and we have to come up with a solution, but too many folks just don't quite have that skill. I would accept me best say that way. In my opinion, too many
Sure.
folks
Sure.
now compared to at least what I remember,
Right.
be able to do that, don't have that skill set.
Yeah. That has been noted. So there have been people who've written over the years about students' ability to engage in multi-step problem solving, and that's one way it's been described. So I'm basically repeating what you said, but
Yeah.
yeah, multi-step problem solving is something that is necessary for algebra, is necessary for calculus, and when all you do is memorize the answers to a select set of problems. What's interesting is because I actually wrote about this for a blog post a couple of months ago, and one of the things that I discovered when researching this is that it's possible for a student to know the answer to a problem and still not fully understand why it's the answer. So when you do a set of problems by rote, our minds are so precise that they can understand the function that you need to engage in. Let's say multiplication. So multiplication is a function. It's an algorithm. So you can understand that function or algorithm and do 3 times 3 is 9, 3 times 7 is 21, 3 times 9 is 27, whatever. You can go through all those, but not understand what that actually means.
Yeah.
And if you don't understand what that actually means, then what happens is when the process of multiplication is applied to variables, when you get to algebra, it's like you'll lack the understanding for why, if X times Y is 27 and Y is 9, what is X?
Yeah.
So it's like they can't quite compute that because now you're dealing with more abstract concepts layered on top of an algorithm called multiplication. So I totally get where you're coming from. Yeah, go ahead.
I know I want to add to that because a slight different point, which is really important, which one things I just try to emphasize to parents that have younger kids.
Mm-hmm.
In the sciences build upon themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why the math, the arithmetic is important.
Mm.
And that's why the algebra is so important.
Right.
Because if you don't have those basic building blocks,
right,
foundation, when you get to calculus, you are going to be lost. Because it's funny, my high school calculus teacher used to joke with us all the time, or jab us all the time. We had a really small class of calculus in a small school. I think there were probably like 6 of us in the class,
Mhm.
but it was really good because we obviously got some direct attention. He would say, "You guys, your problem is not that you don't know calculus. Your problem is you don't know algebra."
See?
And
Right.
he would always joke about, "I don't know what these guys are teaching you guys down in junior high school algebra, because you guys just, you got this, the calculus is not the problem. You just don't have the building blocks."
Yes.
And
Mhm.
he would also encourage us in that, obviously jabbing at us that,
Right.
hey, go back, make sure you understand the basics.
That's
The
good. That's
problems we
good.
were making in doing our assignments were not so much that we didn't understand what he was teaching. It
Right.
was that we had a gap in our knowledge.
Yes.
I guess
Yes.
the point I'm really making is, I think that's one of the important building blocks that parents need to understand.
Mhm.
If you haven't stressed to your child or the importance of those building blocks early on in life,
Right.
they are going to struggle, whether it's in calculus or if it's just making a decision. If you haven't ever allowed them to make a decision for themselves
Right.
and suffer the consequences, good
Mhm.
or bad, of that decision,
Right.
they don't learn.
Mhm.
Then they get to high school or college, and the professor or just life is asking them to make a decision
Right.
based upon a bigger decision, not just whether I want to, you know, I don't know,
Mhm.
wear red pants or blue pants,
Right. Right.
or or go somewhere and with a group of kids, or not go somewhere with a group of kids
Right.
and make the correct decision about whether to go or not to go. Now they can't make the decision because the stakes are a lot higher in college.
Right. Right. Right.
If you make that wrong decision, it's not just that, so you know what I'm saying. I'll
Oh
stop
yeah,
there.
yeah. No, no, that's good. That's good. I agree. I agree. Yeah, most of what we learn is based on a sequence, and it's built on something else. Um, and what's interesting is that when you're taught these things earlier in the sequence, no one is necessarily telling you, you need to know this now because of this later.
Yeah.
You're just told, learn this now. And at some point in time, maybe you'll figure out that it was important that you should have learned that earlier, or maybe you won't. But yeah, I think that the whole way that kids wind up dismissing aspects of what they're learning, I think again has a lot to do with how they envision themselves or where they envision themselves being.
Yeah.
So this other thing that I've talked about or written about before, also this idea of effort optimism,
Mhm.
which is a way of talking about whether what you're doing now will benefit you in the future. So if you have a sense that what you're doing right now is going to benefit you in the future, then it means that you're optimistic about your effort. So if so this spreads across different ways. So if you envision yourself as being a doctor, then of course biology is going to seem that more important. But if you envision yourself as an athlete, which is not to necessarily take anything away from athletics per se, but if you envision yourself as an athlete and only an athlete, it's going to be harder to imagine. It could be harder for that person to imagine why science is important to them.
Yeah.
So so I totally agree that, well, one, the early exposure is important in two ways. One is it's important because a student can discover that they're actually interested in something that no one may have necessarily been able to predict. And so then they become interested in it, and regardless of whether they envision themselves as professional mathematicians or not, they may discover, I just like math, and then figure out how they can be using math and whatever else they do. So like with your siblings, it could be that they didn't necessarily like being in the house during the summer doing math, right? But your two sisters who are school teachers, maybe it was easier for them to teach math to their students because of the math training that your dad gave them. Or for your brother who's in sales, I'll bet you he's doing calculations in his head to help understand whether the prices that are being set are going to benefit him in the long run, or if he needs to calculate things in his head on the fly, during a sales transaction. He's probably doing things and calculating things and moving much faster than other people would if they had to stop and use their phones or their calculators, to do the same thing. So
No, those are actually really good points. I like that. And you call it effort optimism.
yes.
Okay. No, I like
Hmm.
that concept. That's really, I think, it's spot on.
Hmm.
Um, I was gonna just kind of add a little bit to that,
Yeah.
that there are some kids that just like to learn,
Right.
and whatever you put in front of them, they're gonna
Mhm.
learn. They're gonna learn.
Mhm.
But I don't think that's the majority. So I'm partly saying this for the parents out there that might be listening to this. Um, but it doesn't mean you allow them to get away with not learning that area.
Mm,
Um,
mhm.
you still, even if you don't even agree that calculus is important, or that going on the other side, literature is important. You
Right.
know, why do I need to read Macbeth?
Right.
Who cares? I didn't care. I don't really see.
Right. Right.
They still give them the opportunity, or don't allow them to not learn that, because they don't know, and you actually don't know how important that might be to them in the future. So
Right.
like you said, maybe my brother didn't really learn and appreciate the math at that time, but it does give him a leg up on some folks that their parents didn't force them to sit down and do those math problems.
Mhm.
So now he has a little extra skill set, at least in that area,
Right.
of people who
Right.
most of them probably didn't do a whole lot of math problems, because
Mhm.
that's just that most of the folks in advertising just aren't on that kind of science
Mhm.
STEM side.
Mhm.
Um, so it gives them a little leg up on them, like you just kind of mentioned. So yeah, really, I love that idea.
Mhm. Mhm. All right. So let's talk about what you've seen in young patients. Uh, you patients will come to you, and you'll notice something about them. You're doing, eyes, nose, throat examinations, right?
Yeah.
And you'll see something, and you're talking to parents. You'll ask parents, "Well, how are they doing in school?" And maybe they'll say, "Well, uh, doing okay, but he's having a little trouble, or she's having a little trouble reading." What kind of does that trigger a signal for you regarding something else that you would look for?
Yeah. So obviously we kind of break it down into, at least in my mind, into is this a anatomical physiological problem
Hmm.
that I need to address or
Mm,
discuss or diagnose?
right.
So kind of do that part. But then we also have to just kind of see, is there something else outside of that? Is the kind of more psychosocial, what was one of the terms we use,
Hmm.
aspects to
Okay.
the family dynamics, to
Mm,
the home environment, um, to the school environment.
okay.
Um, all of these other kind of things can come into play, which may help or hinder a student from doing as well as they can.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, obviously we probably start with just doing the eye exam,
Hmm.
checking their vision, having them
Hmm.
see the official eye doctor, see if they need glasses, or if there's a vision correction thing we need to kind of see,
Hmm.
because those things can also simply just limit a child's ability or enjoyment of reading. If you can't
Okay.
see the words,
Right.
it makes it kind of hard to actually enjoy doing the assignments.
Hmm.
So in some ways, that's probably the easiest one to fix, because
Okay.
just get them glasses or contacts or whatever it is, and
Right.
they're doing better. Um, but it's interesting, a lot of times in the doctor's office,
Hmm.
in the exam part that we're doing, we're actually, no, I would say that the more important part
Hmm.
of the actual office visit
Hmm.
is more so the conversation that I get from the parents,
Okay. Right.
because that's really going to direct me into, like what you just said. If I get that from the parent, then at least I know there's something in this area that has come to the parents' attention.
Right.
They may not know exactly what it is, but that's part of what I'm there to do, is help them figure it out,
Hmm.
what that something is.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so once I kind of rule out the part that's anatomical, or the physiological part where they can see or can't see,
Right.
then I'm really kind of taking more of the time to figure out, hey, we need to have some conversations here about what else is going on in the child's life or in the home life.
Right.
And it could be something, along the lines of, there could be some disruption in the family, maybe someone sick,
Yeah.
maybe someone just passed away and it really affected the child more than the parent really kind of appreciated. Um,
Mm-hmm.
maybe there's some parental dynamics between mom and dad or something like that, that obviously goes on all the time,
Right.
and that affects the child.
Hmm.
Um, maybe there's something going on at school,
Right.
where they're being bullied, or they just don't feel comfortable,
Yeah.
or their teacher has signaled them out for something.
Yep.
A lot of those dynamics have to kind of be thought about and come into play. So that's really kind of more of a conversation. And that's going back to what you said before.
Yeah.
That's the benefit of having that family physician that you and your child have seen on a regular basis.
Right. Right.
Kind of catch those things before they get too far out of hand. I can, hopefully pick up on some things. Last time I saw John or Jill or whatever their child is, and the parent also feels more comfortable having these conversations.
Right. Right.
You meet a doctor for the first time, you understand. No one really trusts the doctor for the first time. You're always thinking, oh, guys, this guy really good at what he does. Is he really going to take care of me and my family?
Yeah.
So it's the relationships that you're building there. And it's hard to kind of make those distinctions on just one visit if you haven't seen that person for 5 years. So.
This makes me think too. 'Cause when I look back now, I'm realizing or remembering that with the healthcare system that we were in, we wouldn't necessarily see the same doctor each time. There was like a set of 3 or 4. Now, admittedly, for the first few years, there was an African-American doctor that we tried to make sure, we tried to see when he was available, because to our earlier point, we thought it would be important for our sons to see a doctor, a Black doctor, because it helps for them form the idea that they could become a doctor if that's what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
But then as they got older and that doctor retired, we just sort of let it be a little more open. And so they saw a range. One was Asian, one was 2 were white, one was a male, one was a female. So they saw a range of people in that space. But the point here, though, is that to connect to what you were saying earlier, is I wonder if we lost out a bit on building a relationship with them because there was a different doctor each time. So I'm curious to hear from you, from your perspective as a doctor, would you say, during that time when you were a family physician, that parents were open enough, or did you feel could you sense hesitation or sense, sort of a resistance or reticence when it came to talking about what was going on in the lives of their children?
Yeah. So, also interesting. I'm sorry, I don't think you just froze for a second there.
Yeah.
Also interesting that from the physician side, we definitely want to see the same patient over. We want to have our own patient panel, is what we kind of call it. And we want to see our own patients because we understand that relationship, that continuity of care is not just one visit or 2 visits. That if I've seen this child from the time that they were, let's say 2 or 3,
right,
and seen them through their kind of childhood years, and now they're getting ready to go off to school and college, it's that benefit that it benefits the student, it benefits the parent, and it benefits the physician because I don't have to start from scratch.
Right.
All of this knowledge of the things this child has been through over the years, whether they fell and broke an arm in 6th grade, whether they had their braces, put on in 8th grade, and the ups and downs there.
Right.
And then, so there is definitely a lot of benefit in that. So I would encourage parents as much as possible.
Right.
Obviously, it's always hard. Doctors don't work forever.
Right. Yeah. Right.
but folks that have found a good doctor, I have several. I was just thinking about when one of my mentors at University of Maryland. I won't mention his name right now, but he's still there now. When he was there when I was started med school there.
Oh.
He was a young African-American doctor at that time.
Okay.
And he's still there now.
Okay. Wow.
But his patients are so dedicated to him that he's had over the past, 40 years or so, he's had patients obviously that moved away. His patients will fly back to Maryland. These are some retired people, of course.
Yeah.
But they trust him so much and have seen him for the past 30, 40 years that they kind of sometimes fix their medical trips around just seeing him.
Wow.
They may have moved and retired to Florida.
Right.
But they set up their doctor's appointments. They'll set it up to say, okay, I'm going to be in Maryland for 3 days. And in one of my days, I'm going to spend going to see Dr. So-and-so.
Mhm, mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and you know, there's no way to account for that any other way.
Right.
It's really, they trust him, he
Yeah,
knows them,
yeah,
obviously. And so it allows a doctor to get past some of the other just human interactions
mhm.
that occur when you first meet someone,
Right,
or when
right,
you're not quite comfortable with someone.
right,
He doesn't have to go back and start and get their whole history. Part
right.
of, part of his visit is really just catching up. Hey,
Mhm.
what's been going on since I saw you last time?
Right.
And so it really makes the interaction more social.
Yes.
He does obviously gets to the medical part. We still
Right,
need to
right,
do these things,
right,
but if you see his patients when they come in with gifts. They come in.
right,
He spends way too much time with them according to our schedule.
right, yeah, right. Yes,
So
yes,
he does run behind,
right,
but all of his patients know what he does for them and
right.
how he's been seeing them, and that, hey, I may have to wait a little longer, but when I get in there,
Yeah,
I'm going to spend that same amount of time with him and chat with him and joke with him and talk about his family, and he would ask about their kids and
right,
their grandkids and things like that. Um, and then still also in the midst of that, still also kind of take care of their medical needs.
right. That's really important. We could probably branch off and talk about doctor-patient relationships and the impact of healthcare on those relationships, right? I mean, not
Yeah.
that I'm an expert, but just from what I've gathered from,
Yeah.
sort of general, public square kinds of conversations about what's happened. So again, I'm not an expert on that. But to circle back around to, parents and children, what occurs to me also when we think about this, that, the importance of having these conversations early, and we hit on vision, is the importance of identifying other factors early. So in these conversations with, what strikes me here is that it would behoove parents to really kind of let down a little bit of their guard to be able to say, here's what's happening because of it. Now I could, as I say that, what it was occurring to me is, I'm a parent and I know that no parent wants to be humiliated. No parent wants to be quote unquote found out to have made mistakes and how they've raised their children. So I know that we could be sensitive about how somebody might characterize our parenting.
Yeah.
Um, but yet it feels like the more a parent can share, good or bad, about what's happening with their children, things, yeah, I shouldn't bring them to McDonald's as much or whatever. Sorry, McDonald's, but I'm just saying, or maybe I should pay closer attention to their diet or, just whatever, that they should, that those kinds of honest conversations can speak to, I mean, maybe you'll say to them, well, it's okay, McDonald's is okay once a week, but you need to make sure that you add this to their diet, or I see that you're feeling uptight about this thing happening, but you can help them establish some kind of balance. But can you speak to that about
Yeah.
the necessity of identifying issues early on?
Yeah. So I'd say 2 points there. One is just exactly what you said. The sooner that we know about the problem,
Hmm.
the better opportunity we have of kind of correcting anything before it gets too far down the road.
Hmm.
So that's obviously one of the more obvious benefits. The second part of that is we are, and we should be, I guess I should say I am, and the rest of the medical physicians should be sensitive to the fact that, yes, no one wants to, we do understand our position that, like I said before, we're kind of put on a little bit of a pedestal of
Hmm.
having all the answers.
Mm.
Um, of course, we don't have all the answers, but, but we're put on that pedestal. So we do
Yeah,
understand that. And we do understand also that no one wants to be embarrassed, and no one should be embarrassed or criticized about how they live their life.
yeah.
We're not we're not there in the office to judge you, but we
Mm.
are there to help you if you want the help.
Right.
But unless it's something obvious,
Hmm.
we can't help you with that unless we know that it's something that you want help with or dealing with or
Right.
having a challenge with, is probably a better way to say it.
Hmm.
So yeah, having those open conversations, and if you have a good doctor, let me say it this way, if you have a doctor that you bring something up and make you feel small or belittle you
Mm.
about it, that's probably not the person you want to continue going to.
Okay.
So probably really another good point. You don't have to put up with a doctor that's a jerk.
Right, right,
And
right.
like in every other profession, jerks, there's jerks in everywhere you go.
Mhm, mhm.
Doctors that are jerks. So don't,
Right.
don't put up with someone that's a jerk.
Okay.
But most of the folks are not jerks. And
Okay.
if someone's sincere and comes to a physician with a concern, whether it's
Mhm.
a learning disability, or you're just not quite sure, or you're second guessing yourself about how you, like you said, did some parenting issues,
Yeah.
or nutrition issues,
Mhm.
or we know of experienced physician understands and knows that all these are issues.
Right.
Um, we don't have time in that 15-20 minute visit to address everything in
Right.
one visit.
Right.
But what I try to tell my patients when I kind of see them for the first time is that, hey, give me your full list, or
Yeah.
at least write it down. What the plan is that we will try to, can't do the full list today, but
Yeah.
we can come up with a plan that over the next 6 months, 12 months, whatever long, depending on how long your list is,
Right.
you can get to all these issues.
Mhm.
And you can add to the list as much as you want.
Right.
But the goal is to work through that and to have a plan, kind of a health plan
Right.
for the next 12 months or whatever, so that you get to the point where you're happy and comfortable with how you are, your health. And then of course, we're talking about parents, the health
Right.
of your children.
Right. Right. Right.
So, I'm not sure if I kind of got a little track, but I totally answered your question, but I
No,
wanted
no,
to frame it that way.
no, that's fine. I think what we should do, maybe to, boy, this time's going by fast. I was looking at the time. But sort of my pastor would say, to bring our plane in, he's going to bring his plane in for a landing. That means that he's like about to conclude. So, so to do that, can we maybe take through a few of the things that parents should be looking for? So there's the overall health of the child, right? And that in and of itself is important. Like, I don't want to come off as if the child is only important to the extent that they can produce high grades in school, right? Because that's not really the whole thing. But for the sake of, this conversation and the kinds that I've been having, for the parents that are interested in, again, sort of the intersection of health and academic achievement, just tick off a few of the things that you feel that parents should be keyed in on, as the kinds of things that could yield a deeper conversation about how to resolve those kinds of health issues.
I'm not quite sure I'm understanding your question. Are you talking about the health issues that the child might have? Or
Yes, right. So the kinds of things that you feel could impact academic performance, or, the kinds of things or the kinds of triggers that you feel will come up in conversation
okay.
that you would say, okay, well, we should look deeper into this.
Okay, so I would say for most kids, it's most kids are healthy, first of all.
Okay.
Obviously, there's some kids that have medical problems, whether it's asthma or cancer or something like that. They have special needs for those. And there's a whole special needs category of some of our mentally challenged population, which is totally fine. But those aside, our general pediatric population are generally healthy kids.
Okay.
For the most part.
Okay.
So with that, and I think that's probably where most of those parents are in that category, because that's just what we have in America. It ends up being mostly psychosocial issues.
Okay.
Which affects kids in their learning.
Okay.
So unless there's a diagnosable physical problem,
right,
for kids, it's, hey, what's going on in the household? Is there structure? It's probably another way to say it.
Right.
Although kids would never say it and don't really like it, kids actually like structure. It's what keeps their life on track. It's what keeps them from feeling comfortable and safe.
Okay.
So that structure with regular bedtime, regular wake up time, regular chores to do. Part of that is regular study time. You know what? We typically eat at this time. You start your studying at 7.
Right.
Study from 7 to 8, or if you're older, 7 to 9, whatever it is. If you're even older than that in high school, in some classes, you have to study longer than that. But you have regular study time.
Yeah.
You can, and then after that is set, then you squeeze in some social TV time or video game time.
Right.
So, but I think in general, too many parents don't think of it, structure it that way.
Okay.
And they just allow it to kind of happen. If you just allow it to happen, you end up with 3 hours of video games,
Right.
and 30 minutes of studying.
Right.
Which is just that imbalance.
Yes.
And then the student gets frustrated because obviously they're not performing at school.
Right.
They study for 30 minutes.
Right.
Now they're frustrated. And now the parents also frustrated because the child has come home with a bad grade.
Right.
And now that starts to kind of unravel and become this larger problem.
Right.
So
Right.
My biggest suggestion would be for parents is to structure their child's day and week and month. And within that structure, they will find plenty of time to have fun.
Right.
But if they don't have that, then everything else kind of falls apart.
Okay. Well, that's good. I'm glad that we landed there because, I had my own thoughts about what children might be facing, but I think with you speaking to this and saying the children are mostly healthy, and that there shouldn't be a lot of parents looking for or expecting there to be health challenges. There are some, but the majority of parents shouldn't be looking or considering or should not be carrying the hypothesis that I had, admittedly, coming into this conversation, that there were a significant number of parents who are facing health challenges with their children that could be interrupting their achievement. So thank you so much, Dr. Majette. Mario. I mean, we just say, I just say Mario, but for the benefit of the audience, I will give you your proper respect in that regard. So
let me say, Arnold, thank you. I've enjoyed this, and obviously I enjoy all of our talks. And for the audience, this is pretty much how we talk kind of all the time. It's just these conversations like this. So thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Okay. Many thanks go out to Mario for that conversation, even though this is how we usually talk to each other. Admittedly, we ambled down a couple of unexpected paths, but we did get to the kinds of perspectives that I think only a family physician could offer. Here's some of what I heard. 1, sharing your child's challenges early with your family physician can give you more of a chance to correct them. 2, consider sticking with the same physician over time if you can, so that you can establish a baseline of trust with them and they can track your child's development over the long term. 3, because pediatric medicine can also include training in child development, their expertise can go beyond physical health and include social and mental health as well. Then, based on how he's seen children develop from elementary school to college, students need more practice thinking sequentially and to learn how that kind of thinking can aid in decision making. And then lastly, his life's journey up until now speaks to the power of parental example, given how his father sparked his interest in chemistry and math. I hope you found something here worth noting or sharing. If so, I also hope you'll consider subscribing and perhaps leave a comment. You may just get a conversation started of your own. Thanks for tuning in.